other things happen in life that cause people to get out of this stuff, and you can't take your business with you to the grave. So I realized you're not going to win the lottery if you don't buy a ticket. So I sent these letters. And I'm like, hey, the timing may be way off, but just hang on to my info. Keep it in mind. If you want to chat now, great. I'm a real person. If and when that time comes, I would just welcome the conversation. I'd rather have 10 side hustles all making 10 grand a month than to have one making it all. I guess I sleep better at night with diversification. I find it interesting. It keeps me engaged.
Here's how one side hustler strategically acquired 200 grand a year in, we'll call it semi-passive income. And why go through the trouble of building up your own cash flow when with a little determination, a little hustle, you can insert yourself into some income streams that are already happening. That's what today's guest has done, not once, not twice, but 5 different times, stacking up what would be considered small-ish business acquisitions into a healthy full-time income in exchange for part-time work. From linkmoser.com. Link Moser, welcome back to the Side Hustle Show.
Thanks, Nick. Great to be back. Always love getting your emails, and kudos to all the great work that you do. My kids were excited that, Dad, you're going to be on that show with Nick. Yeah, I am, guys. So thank you for all that you're doing. Happy to be here, and yeah, excited to share.
It comes full circle. Glad I got some street cred with the kids. So,
yeah.
Now, Link, we last heard from you. It was late 2022. We covered one of your other income streams, which I thought was really creative. At that time, it was this real estate lead generation site that you'd have for years and years, where single referrals could be worth tens of thousands of dollars. And maybe this is kind of a theme, looking for these really leveraged activities where I could do, it's going to take the same amount of work to do, this path or this other path, and the hourly return on this other path seems to be a lot greater. So I think it's an interesting angle, and the one we'll get into in this episode. We're going to talk about the specific types of businesses that Link found most attractive to try and go out and buy, how he found and negotiated with the owners for sometimes pretty low down payments, low risk up front. And maybe more interesting, even though they weren't necessarily even for sale. I think that's how do I go buy something that's not for sale, and the time and logistics that goes into that portfolio today. So as we've alluded to, you're a man of many side hustles. What inspires you to go out and try and acquire some cash flow in this way? It's a really unique strategy that a lot of people probably don't think about.
It was really, like so many things in life, accidental. It was around 2010, so I'm about 10 years into this this business of building websites and hosting them, which I started, ironically around the same time I got into real estate, about 20 years old in the mid 90s. Fell into both of these paths, and
like the OG, like early days of the internet.
Early days, AOL was still a thing, and there, like others, there were other people starting up in this space, and I had a friendly competitor that was in right 30 minutes from me, and I think it was a husband and wife team, and they went a little bigger than I did. They went and got an office, they got employees, and I was still sort of much just kind of doing this stuff solo and having some freelance help. But to me, they looked like they were bigger, and who knows what kind of money they were making. But lo and behold, one day they closed their doors, and I heard about it through the grapevine. I don't remember how, but they had just either given their book of business or maybe sold it short money to another firm, 45 minutes away. And
okay.
And because I was always bidding against these guys, and I remember thinking, why didn't I get a seat at the table? Why didn't they reach out to me? Did they think I was too small? Did they think I didn't have the means to do this? And maybe they were right, but I still would have liked a chance to have that conversation. So
yeah,
that's what prompted me to start sending letters out. I thought, you know what? I'm not going to let this happen again in my own backyard.
So to pause, so you're already kind of doing this web design hosting on a small-ish scale for local businesses, local companies. And the attractive piece of this is that recurring, okay, great. It's great to get a website build project, but that's one-time revenue, where the real sweet spot is in this, recurring hosting and maintenance type of fee. Is that right?
That's right. I joke that I have made a ton of mistakes in my life, but the one that I think I got right was from day one. Hey, I just built you a website, Nick. Where are you going to host it? Oh, I don't know. Well, hey, guess what? I can host it for $30 a month or something,
Yeah.
which doesn't sound like a lot of money. And you're going to say, yeah, sure, great. I had a good experience. You built my site. Go ahead, host it. And I
Yeah,
started
and
doing
for a
that.
lot of these companies, it's like it's a no-brainer. I want a single point of contact for, you're going to be my outsourced IT department. Like
Right.
you
Right.
deal with it. Sure, yes, fine.
Yep.
Let me set up that recurring payment.
Yep. I'll get your email. I'll help you with your domain name. And in the early days, it was a little more technical, but nowadays it's really pretty straightforward stuff. And a lot of designers were strictly, hey, I built you a site. I don't want to host it. I don't want to be on call.
Yeah,
I
because it
get
doesn't
that.
look like you have a server bank,
No, no,
in
I
a
don't.
spare
I
bedroom or
don't.
anything. Like
Uh,
it's all like reseller hosting, right? Like I
it
just
is
partner,
reseller. Yeah.
yeah, with
Yeah. You
some other
partner with
hosting company.
somebody. Yeah, exactly. That does a good job and it's got good support. And, you've got somebody watching your back. But it did lay that track early on for recurring revenue, which has really become a big part of what I do. So I don't know
Okay.
if I had that foresight then, but I'm glad I did.
Okay. So the game plan. So there's somebody else doing this locally, and they sell to somebody else, and you're like, whoa. I would have taken, you would have
Yeah,
happily
they.
taken that off your hands. And so the game plan becomes, well, who are the other smallish operators like me or like them who have this, a piece of their revenue pie is that
Hmm.
attractive, recurring, low maintenance hosting type of revenue, and trying to proactively, get on their radar.
Yep, exactly. And so, I use this little thing called Google, and I reached out and said, who else is doing this around me? And I wrote him a letter, a one-page letter. Hey, my name's Link. I've I'm in this same business as you are. I'm reaching out to see or just make the connection if you are ever thinking of shifting gears. Now, granted, this is a 10, 15-year-old industry, so a lot of people weren't at traditional retirement age if they started when they were younger. But
Yeah.
other things happen in life that cause people to get out of this stuff, and you can't take your business with you to the grave. So I realized you're not going to win the lottery if you don't buy a ticket. So I sent these letters, and I'm like, hey, the timing may be way off, but just hang on to my info. Keep it in mind. If you want to chat now, great. I'm a real person. But if and when that time comes, I would just welcome the conversation. May be a good fit, may not, but hey, I'm putting myself out there.
Okay. So it's kind of a soft intro. Have you ever considered selling? If you have, give me a call. Or it, and it's, I imagine you're going through pages and pages. You're just looking up like New Hampshire web
I started,
design type of
yeah,
companies. Like
and
it's
there
kind of
weren't many.
hard. Yeah, it's hard to imagine like people would call themselves different. I'm a creative agency, or there's different ways people might brand that.
There are, and you had to pick through. Is it web designer? Is it marketing agency? And so if you really took your time, and there weren't very many that local, so I could go look at their website and see, okay, yeah, it looks like, nope, oh no, you're doing TV spots. Well, that's not for me. I mean, you kind of
Okay.
figure,
Okay.
you could look at their website and see if it's a match. And oh, we build websites, we host websites. Okay, great. And if they didn't have 30 people under the about page, then you could figure, all right, there's a small operation here, because I can't take over some giant monster company. I didn't have that kind of means.
Hmm. Okay.
And
Okay.
I think the first one was around 2014 when somebody did respond, and it was local and it was small, like similar size to me. It was a husband and wife team, and I think the husband took ill and passed away, and he had all the technical knowledge. So the wife's like, I can't run this, but she'd gotten my letter like a year or two later, hung on to it,
Yeah,
and
planting those
yeah,
seeds.
plant
It
those
could be a
seeds.
really long lead time or conversion cycle, as they
Correct,
say. Yeah.
correct. You've got to think the long game here, and most of these people don't reach out to you and, hey, I got your letter, but many of them hang on to it and file it away, and you're glad they did. And so she reached out, and she probably had 20, 30 customers, and I took those over with no money down, and it was I'll give you half of whatever I collect for 12 months, so 12 payments. So if $100 comes in January, then I'll give you a check for $50 on the 1st of February, and I'll do that 12 months, whatever it is. So it's based on retention. The more we can hang on to, the more I get. And in that case, that woman just wanted a home for the customers. It wasn't at the small level. It's not usually always monetary. It's, hey, I'm done doing this. I need to
Yeah.
find a good, trusted home for my customers. I've talked to you. You seem like we have similar values. Let's figure this out. So, and you'd asked me why I started doing this, and it was partly because I felt like I'd missed an opportunity, but it was also getting harder and harder for me to grow organically because by now everybody was doing this stuff, and that growth was not as strong. So this was another way to grow, and
Mm.
sometimes a good conversation is a one to many where you might invest in that relationship, but it may yield 50 accounts. How long would it take to get those organically?
Interesting. So, a like a new website coming online has a huge menu of choices between WordPress and Squarespace and Webflow and every other thing. But for some of these, and they each of those are going to have their own hosting packages, and, and so instead it's like, well, how can I go for people who already have a website? They're already used to paying for hosting. How can I get in front of them in this kind of creative, unique way? And it sounds like it may be really is a matter of right place, right time, for this
It is
existing
timing.
owner, seller who is looking to get out. So give me a sense of, the volume of letters that you sent out, the research that went into it, like the response rate. I imagine it's like anything direct mail has got to be pretty low.
So I would do this in spurts as I had time to. Up until last year, I used to send these out manually. I'd written a little form letter in Word. I'd print the letters out. I'd hand sign all of them. And then I'd print on the envelopes because my handwriting wouldn't get the letter there. And then I'd beg my kids, like, hey, help me stuff these. And I might do 100, 200 in a batch, but it might
Oh,
be,
okay.
it'd take an hour or so and then pay for the stamps.
Yeah.
And after I exhausted New Hampshire, I found a virtual assistant to help research the name. So I went on Upwork and found a fellow, and I would just go state by state. Okay, New Hampshire's done. Give me Maine and Vermont, and the bigger states would be longer to list, so it would take me a while to go through 500, 600 people. And I wanted to stay local because I felt that was a connection that I could, hey, I'm right here in New Hampshire, or you're right over in Vermont, or you're in Massachusetts.
Okay. Okay.
I'm here in New England, just like you. You're trying to find a way to connect.
Yeah, at least it gives you a starting point versus
Correct.
like some company in
Yeah.
Montana or something. Okay.
And a lot of these people at the smaller size, their clients valued the perception of a local relationship. I mean, these days people are less worried about that, but back, 15 years ago, it mattered, and it still does to some, all things being equal.
Sure. So having this virtual assistant comb through the directories of, web design, web hosting, marketing
Yep.
agency, all these variations on certain keywords where somebody has hosting as their, under their menu of services.
Correct. And I would pay them about 25 cents a lead. And I got this person dialed into where it was working well. But in the beginning, I would say, hey, send me 10 listings. Let me take a look at them. I'll manually go look at the websites and I'll give them feedback. These two are on point. This one is not. Here's why. And once we kind of had that dialed in, because I needed to have the owner's name, first and last name, because I wanted to personalize it,
Yeah.
and I needed a valid mailing address. And I wanted a website so I could go look at it.
Oh, I
And
like that. Send me 10 as a trial task. We'll
yes,
see if we're on the
yep,
right path.
correct. And then, all right, send me another 10. Now send me 20. And once we got, because I would shift it over time. I would say, hey, these are a little too big. Look at the head counts if they're under 5, or I don't want anything with video work on it because that wasn't my cup of tea. So we would sort of refine that model, and we'd go state by state, and they'd send me the list, and I would just kind of ask for it whenever I had the bandwidth, and I would send out letters, and inevitably, and I would track it all in Excel, which I realize is very low tech. But the
That's
response rate would be 10 to 12%, which I think was pretty darn good.
that's shockingly high for direct mail. Like
Yep.
no, normally the rule of thumb rate is like
Like
1%.
1 to 2, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I measured that by the response. So certainly not meaning, hey, we're going to make a deal. It was more,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
did I get a call or an email back from somebody? And it's like a funnel, right? You talk to so many, and then you get serious with a few more. You ask for some financials, and you kind of work through it. And there was, of course, a gazillion conversations that went nowhere, or at least
Yeah.
nowhere at the moment. And so I had to have the bandwidth and the capacity to, you send out letters. You better be ready when the phone rings that you're going to have some calls, and um,
Yeah.
kind of do
Is,
that.
so is that the kind of the main, like put your phone number at the bottom? Hey, call me if this is of interest, or we could, talk through what a deal might look like, next steps, get a
Yep.
sense, get to know each other.
It,
What's the sign off here?
this is definitely, here's my phone number. Here's my email address. And then I think it was important to put my LinkedIn URL because I wanted them to look me up. Because many people were like, is this real? So I would use my company logo letterhead. I put the LinkedIn, just go check me out. I'm a real person. There's no scam here. Because many of these, especially the little guys, they never got a letter like this. They're thinking, what is the angle with this
Yeah.
guy?
No, yeah,
And
it's certainly a unique approach. This is Windhill design. So this would
yep,
be like, hey, look, we've been doing this for years. We're going to take good care of your clients. It's not just some fly by
yes.
night type of operation.
I'm like you. We're both similar here, and I'm not making any assumptions. Nobody tipped me off that you're about ready to retire. I'm a guy reaching out, making connection. If and when this is something you want to chat about, I'm right here.
Yeah,
And
with bonus points if you're if you're Upwork VA could find the about page and it's got a gray haired guy
yeah,
on it.
yeah,
Like, oh, okay, this is a I'll pay 50 cents for that lead. Okay.
that's right, that's right. If you know something that's going to happen in their lives, and that's the big. If people are listening, there's a takeaway here. I learned as I had more and more of these conversations. Some of them felt like wild goose chases. That if I could drill down, why are you reaching out to me now, Nick? What it is that about my letter prompted you to reach out. I'm digging, I'm probing a little here to. Are you just thinking that maybe I'm some dumb guy with a bunch of money, that's going to overpay, and you hadn't thinking until you got this letter, or is there something else in your life that you want to pursue? This is, I hate to say, a health factor, but sometimes that's the case.
Yeah.
Um, some other reason besides strictly financial of why we might be talking now.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, you might. It's like how Zillow used to have the make me move
Make me move.
price or
Yep.
something.
Yep.
It's like, yeah, it's not for sale, but how much are we talking here?
Right. Right. Those were. I made it clear to people that I was not going to overpay. I couldn't be that person. I didn't just win the lottery here and I'm bored and sprinkling money around. I
Yeah.
if they didn't have a good reason, I didn't really push the It was sort of like, hey, you're going to make more money hanging on to this because, right? We both know the recurring revenue, and we both realize the comfort that comes from this. So
Hmm.
I'm not fooling anyone into thinking I can adjust their trajectory. So I wanted a good reason that was there, and then if that was there, like you said, the timing was right. You could then take the conversation to a second date, so to speak.
Yeah, if it's a good book of business for you to buy, it's by definition it's a good business book of business for them to hold on to too. So
Correct. Correct.
it's kind of like, well, shoot, why am I letting go of this recurring
Yeah.
revenue
Yep.
cash cow? Okay,
Yep.
so the question, hey, why are you reaching out? What prompted you to respond to this letter? And trying to probe for some indication that like, hey, I'm trying to take some chips off the table. I'm
Mm-hmm.
nearing
Mm-hmm.
retirement. Just trying to explore, okay, what does the next step look like? I'd like to have a smooth transition handoff for these clients that
Yes.
I've probably had for 5, 10, 15 years
Yep.
in some cases. When you talk to me about the next steps of due diligence and like trying to get, because it's going to be sensitive. Now all of a sudden they're having to open up their
Mm-hmm.
books and financials and like prove they are making what they say they're making, and even that's kind of like a personal question, like
Mm-hmm.
you know why are you reaching out? Well, by the way, what's your monthly recurring revenue here? And it's like, whoa, we just met.
Yeah. It is like dating, right? You're not going to ask for marriage on that first date,
Yeah.
and so I'm very mindful of respecting that and knowing everyone's going to be a little different. Now, surprisingly, people are very open about things like financials, and people sometimes are very forthcoming because I will dance around people are more willing to share maybe top line revenue, what they brought in versus what they kept. So, I have no clue how big they are. So, how many clients do you have? That's kind of a roundabout way to asking,
Okay.
that. So, if your intro call went well and you found some motivation that you're comfortable with, then the next step is to sort of size this thing up and see if it's a fit. Because I don't want to promise that I can flip into your shoes and do what you do. I want to know a little more. And in the beginning, it was me sending emails with questions. And then eventually I made a list of questions that was about 2 pages. And I said, hey, if this all sounds good, I've got some questions. I'm going to send them to you. Don't feel you have to answer any or all of them because I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. But these are things that would help me size this up because, of course, they're sitting there wondering, what are you going to pay me for this? And I said, well,
Hmm.
I need to know more and I need to know sure it's a fit. And I'm also going to send over an NDA. So I get ahead of that before they even ask for one, whether they know what that means even.
Okay.
I'm going to send that over with my signature on it because you should have this. This is just good, proper protocol, so that you know that our conversation is confidential. And it goes without saying, I said, but let's have a piece of paper to make sure that that's there. So
Fair.
I'm proactive with that.
This is
'Cause,
a non-disclosure agreement for
yep,
those unfamiliar with the acronym.
yep, means what we talk about stays confidential. And because you're trying to build trust, and I want this person, especially if I get the sense they have something I want, I really want them to like and trust me. So I need to establish that early on. Genuinely, let's go, assume definitely genuinely, not that I'm trying to fleece anyone. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to also make this as easy and smooth for them, recognizing the sensitivity that they're parting with a part of them for whatever
Yeah.
reason.
Yeah. And the alternative is them, selling it through a brokerage, and now you've got a competing bid situation. You're trying to want to eliminate all of that by being proactive and being the only
Yes,
person who's even having this conversation with them. So
correct.
asking the kind of things, well, how many clients do you have? I imagine it would be, what percentage of this is like the one-off design work? You're like, well, I don't know if I
Yep,
need to buy myself another job. And I don't know how much of that is really going to be, how much of that could I really count on if they have a
correct,
personal relationship with
correct,
you or your design team? And it's like,
correct.
well, I don't know. That's a little bit harder to put a value on versus the recurring revenue side. Like, okay, I expect, I don't know, what is a reasonable number, like 75 to 80% retention rate. Yeah, just keep it on the same server. Let's keep it going, and then I can throw out a valuation or a multiple based on that.
It is all over the map, and those are the questions that are part of that early due diligence before you can put a value on it. And I'll tell people that because I will value you've got recurring revenue and then kind of everything else, what I will call project based or one time revenue, and it's a much lower value because exactly to your point, you don't know how much of that will stick and carry forward. So it's not that it isn't got some value, but it's certainly not predictable, and it speaks to kind of the terms by which I structure a deal. So first you got to know if you want it, and then if you want it, you got to think about how will I value this, and be ready to present that to that owner.
Is there a rule of thumb for, okay, I'm going to, put the one-time revenue at, 1x earnings, because I don't know if that's going to materialize, or even less than that, versus, okay, the recurring revenue, I'm more comfortable paying a higher multiple. Like, are there any rules of thumb, or is it just like, hey, we got to start the negotiation somewhere, so I'm going to put it at, 2.5 times, or like something like that.
There isn't a rule of thumb. Years and years ago, I knew a fellow that did mergers and acquisitions in this space, way bigger deals, and I would pick his brain a little, and this was probably 15 years ago. His rule of thumb was for this small stuff was that it was around 1 to 1.5 times gross on the hosting, and then zero point 0.5, 0.75 on the product base. Now I think this day and age that's probably a little low. It
Yeah.
also depends on the size. If you're talking about 50K in revenue versus 500K, the bigger fish is going to get a higher multiple, even on the blend. But if this little stuff, if you're talking, let's say around that 50K or under or above, 0 to 100, um,
Okay.
I'm trying to be probably, a starting point 1.5 on the hosting, and maybe close to the point 0.8 or 1 on the project based. I've got a little Excel tool I made where I plug all this stuff in, and then I spend a little time looking at it because you got to look and say, is this fair, right? Even if somebody is really motivated to sell, you still have to be fair, and you can't. I'll just take it. Some people
Yeah,
will
yeah,
approach and say, I won't put anything down. I'll just pay you an earnout, and unless we're talking like 10 to 15 clients, then I should put some skin in the game for
okay,
somebody. I think that's the right thing to do. If you're talking $50,000 a year in, say, hosting revenue, that's good value, and then it's pretty sticky. So if that's a cPanel and it moves right over into your universe, that's almost, that's pretty much almost all profit if you've got your hosting capacity in place.
right, yeah. And that would be the equivalent of probably pretty close to a median income.
Yeah,
If you're at
yeah,
50 grand a year, to just have that cash flow show up all of a sudden in your bank account instead. And so a fair price, excuse me, for fair price for that might be 75K, but you've kind of structured it in a way where you're not necessarily stroking a check for 75K up front. It's kind of this combination of, hey, I'll make you a down payment, and then we'll do some kind of performance-based earnout.
correct,
And maybe we
correct.
can use your first couple deals as an example. You mentioned the first one was no money down, but
Yep.
maybe the second or third. Like let's talk through some of those examples.
So 2017, I came back and picked up another one. I got a little more purposeful. So I had my focus shifted to the other side hustle, the real estate world, from about 2014 to 2017. So I was not as focused on growing this at that time because my focus was on the real estate business. So when I shifted my focus back to this, I dusted my old inkjet, and started sending letters out.
Yeah,
And there
and
was
and to be clear, hundreds and hundreds of letters. Like
yes, hundreds
a
of letters.
volume game. I'm trying to cast a wide net. I'm trying and make sure every hosting reseller in New England has heard my name.
I
I
mean,
want
but
to.
by now there's probably been 8,000 letters that have gone out over the
Okay,
last 10 years.
that's great.
Um, yeah, it's a lot. Now I,
Do you
I
start now? Do you start back at the top of the list and like, oh, it's been 10 years. Might as well hit these people up again.
I should. I also got emails, so then I started doing email like, hey, did you get my letter? Or hey,
Okay.
it's been a few years. Let me check in with you. And some people were like, hey, I sold it 2 years ago. Oh,
Okay.
dang, I didn't check in enough. Um,
That's
so
right.
yeah,
Yeah, it's like trying to like uh, keep the multiple touch
you
points.
you do. You got to find that balance of not being a pest.
Hmm.
But in 2017, a good one of the first one in the most recent batch, I would say, was a fellow here in New Hampshire. It was a second career for him. He had about 35 customers, a mix of hosting and project-based work, and his wife was getting ready to retire, so they were going to travel some, and he was ready to just have this off his plate. He had already tried to find a home for it with another company locally and did not have a good experience with them, and then okay, you guys aren't a match. So he was primed and ready. And when we met, we hit it off. He's like, yeah, great, you seem like a good fit, let's do this. So I offered him 3 deal scenarios, and I forgot the other two, but the one he picked was $4,000 down and 18 months of earnout payments. So, and I think that was 50% on the recurring, or the hosting revenue. This is based on the gross, which is easier to track and more transparent. And I think 35% on the one time. So just I'll clarify what that looks like. It's January right now. So if $100 in hosting revenue comes in January and 100 in project based, February I will make a check for $50 on the hosting and 35 on the project base. So $85 check February 1st, and we'd follow that model for 18 payments. So that
Okay, you're keeping more margin on the hosting because there's more margin there. You're paying less margin to the seller on the project base because that is requiring some labor on your
it
front.
is requiring some labor, and it's also not as sticky, so it's not as worth as much. So the hosting revenue is worth more and had better margin, so
Yep. Okay.
I put more value on that. So that total book of business, I think, was worth around $32,000
Okay.
in gross revenue. So
And that feels like we talk about mergers and acquisitions and like, millions of dollars changing hands. It's like, no, there are these little mini businesses, still great cash flow, especially as a side hustle. Like, oh,
Yep.
if I
Yep.
could add $30,000 to my income next year with $4,000 down and a few hours of work every week, like that's a pretty good trade.
It is, and I think for someone listening, thinking about this, what had helped me was that I was already in the space. So, it may be a little harder to buy the first one on terms like this because somebody's going to say, I don't know if you can do this, right? I'm depending on you to perform in order for me to get paid out. So this would not be deal terms out of the gate. Either you start it
Mm,
and you get in it. You can still do it on the side, but you need to have the experience, or you might need to pay more traditional. I'm going to make fixed payments, and I think a seller would still carry payment, but you might not be able to do the earn out if you were completely new to this,
got it, got
especially if
it.
they knew you were working a full time job, or because think about it from their perspective, right?
Well, I'm
Maybe
just
this
about to turn around and like start looking for people in the Seattle area trying to sell their businesses. But you're right. This got to be, well, you got to establish some
credibility,
credibility and
yeah.
authority before you can structure something
Uh,
completely like this. And even if it's just setting up your own home base and, even gathering just a handful of clients to get some practice under your belt.
correct,
Because
correct,
otherwise you're like, now it's trial by fire. And this person has entrusted me
yeah.
with their longtime clients. And
And you
I
got to
got to
take
figure
that
this out.
seriously. And I will say, writing those checks, I never missed one, but some of the I've written some big checks to people, and then that it hurts a little, but when that period is over, you'll be able to keep all that. So your hope is that you can hang on to these clients, and attrition is a horrible word, but it happens, and you do lose clients with the transition sometimes, and oh man, I just bought this guy, and he's going out the door on month two, and
Hmm.
is that my fault? Does he just not like me? Was he already on his way out? I mean,
Yeah, especially if there's only, you know, 10 or 20 clients, losing a
yes,
couple is
it's a
a
big,
big percentage wise.
yep,
You're like, oh shoot, I
yep.
was I was banking on that revenue. I just paid for, a multiple of that revenue.
There
But
was a deal in 2020 that was a company in Denver that did social media marketing, and they had a monthly recurring revenue of about $20,000 when I took it over.
okay,
Only about 12 clients, so this was not hosting. This was more retainer based work, and I took that over with nothing down, but and it had employees, and we kept that brand separate. But by May, I bought it into January 1. By May, it was the doors were shut. So that had shed enough clients where I couldn't make the payroll, and I wasn't going to ride this thing down into
yeah,
the bottom. And we had to say, okay, that's that. And had I not structured it that way, I would have really financially found myself in a pickle. So it does happen, and that's sort of what brings us back to, I like the hosting side because that is more like the power company, right? When was the last time you called the power company? Probably when the power went out, right? Otherwise, we don't bug them. The lights are on. I'm happy.
yeah. It's a utility, and it's
The
priced
utility.
as hopefully it's priced as such, where it's just kind of this low monthly recurring thing. If I want my
Yes.
website to exist, I just got to keep paying
And
this.
that's right. And if you don't give them a reason to go anywhere, they're not going to. Keep the price fair, keep the lights on, and you don't need to pay for staff or your time to manage that. So
Is
it
there
brought
anything
me back to that service being a good fit.
Is there anything specific that you do during that transition time to introduce yourself? Hey, I'm Link. I'm taking over. So and so is handing over the reins. Don't worry, you're in good hands. I've been doing this forever. It's going to be a seamless transition for you. Like, what does that handoff look like to minimize that fall off?
It's different every time, but I think some common traits are that you're going to lean on that seller in those first 30, 45, 60 days to follow their lead. They know those relationships, so they're going to know who might be a little more sensitive, who might need a little more hand holding. You certainly want that seller to stay visible. Ideally, they are reaching out by phone and email to these folks, not just boom, hey, I'm out the door.
Yeah.
So how they leave that relationship sort of sets you up for you taking it over. And if it's straight hosting, then it's not really a big deal. But if they are used to more points of contact because you're doing some print design, you're doing some web maintenance, things that have more interaction, then you need to be able to slip into that cadence, and maybe you sit on a call or Zoom with them, and there's a handoff. Somebody, as they're phasing out, you're phasing up. It's not necessarily boom, here are the keys, Link. Good luck.
Yeah, and they've got, in most cases, they've got that 12 to 18 month earn out. So there's some incentive for them to
Yes.
make it a smooth transition
Yes.
so they can maximize their ultimate payout at the end.
Correct. That is a huge part of that. It aligns our goals. I want to retain. They want to maximize. We both want to keep these clients in the fold and happy.
So you typically do it as a, I guess, a percentage of what you collect rather than like, I'm going to pay you the $75,000 purchase price and we're just going to stretch it out, or it's like, I'm going to pay you this much up front and then we're going to see what comes in and I'm just going to give you a fixed percentage of that. If it grows, great. If it goes
Yeah.
down, that's what happens.
It has always been variable because otherwise they're just making me alone, and I need their incentive to help with retain, because if they're going
Yeah.
to get their 75 grand no matter what, they just have to wait for it. That puts more risk on my side. I want them to know, if Bob or Sue leaves, they're walking out the door with revenue that affects both of us, not just me.
Yeah.
And that does require you building a lot of trust, because they're thinking, Link, are you going to take this seriously? Are you going to screw off, or you're going to jack the prices? I mean, so
Yeah.
I will even write in the agreement, I'm not raising prices during the earnout.
Okay.
I'm willing to agree to certain non-boat rocking. Um, if they've got an employee, or I can't promise I'll keep employees, but freelancers, if they're client facing and it's a good fit, I'll try to hang on to that and just kind of keep things as same as it can. The money goes somewhere different. That's the only different, Mr. Client.
Yeah, that brings up the next point of like when the project based stuff comes in, that's great. If they had somebody on their team who was already doing that, it's like, sure, just let me pass along that same project over to you and be the manager, reviewer, overseer versus, well, now somebody's asking for this, redesign, and either I got to figure that out or I got to go find
Hmm.
somebody who's qualified to do it.
I've had pretty good luck maintaining a good long-term relationship with various contractors and freelancers over the years. So some of them which have teams behind them so they can scale. Certainly, if you're going through one of these, I'm going to tell the people that I'm working, hey, do you have more capacity? Do you want more work? If not, I'm going to need to, tee up that. And so one of the last ones I did in 2023 came with a whole bunch of print design work. So I needed to find a print designer to help with this. And,
Okay.
and so, because the previous owners was a husband and wife team, and the husband was doing the creative design. So I don't know how to use Adobe InDesign. I don't want to use Adobe InDesign. So I needed to find someone to help with that. And again, it takes a little due diligence and find, just like you're finding an employee. But I've got a good person now who's works stateside and same time zone, and takes the design projects, and
Yeah.
it's been working well. So it's um, you have enough runway. And in that case, those owners still did contract work for me for a good 6 to 12 months of a 24 month earnout. So that was a
Oh, okay.
very
Okay.
gradual
Yeah.
timeline. They wanted to keep the revenue. They wanted to, let the dust settle. They were not web people, so the web stuff I took over right away, but they hung on to some of the print work, and they stayed more client facing, and we gradually moved those relationships over on their timeline, and that's worked out well.
Yeah, this is a big question mark, I think, for a lot of business owners is like, what is the exit strategy? And if there's a way to draw down and slowly reduce your hours while still getting some income, I think that probably makes a lot of sense because you don't. It's not something you think about day to day.
No,
It's like, no,
no.
I'm just doing my thing, and then it's the question of like, how long do I keep doing this thing? It's like so somebody like Link comes along and says, hey, I'm offering you an exit plan, and it's like, oh, I never thought about that. Like, oh, okay, so like it could be pretty attractive. I did want to ask if this is purely like a war of attrition where it's like, okay, I bought 30 clients. At the end of 2 years, I hope to have 20 of them. Like, does it grow? Like, are new people signing up? Or it's like, we had we had a guy from Philip Morris come and like talk to our group in college, and we're like, is are new people starting smoking anymore? He's like, no, this business has been around for 100 years, but it declines 3% a year, 3% a year, and it's like, okay, so it's like slowly dying, and they were trying to diversify. I'm like, whatever, but it was it was just a weird, like, yeah, we openly admit that it may not be around forever, but like it's still a huge business. It just is like slowly declining. Is it similar here where it's just trying to do the best to keep what you have?
At the small end, where I have played for the most part, I'd say yes. You're buying a client list, so there's not usually a brand. It's just because they had a logo and a trade name doesn't mean it was a recognizable brand. The owner or owners were the brand. They were the business development people. They were the lead generation team. So when that is gone, especially if it's not local, you might get some referrals, possibly not necessarily on the hosting piece, but on design work. If someone is happy and they're not going to refer you until they get to know you. But if it's going well, by month 6 to 9, they might be a referral. But
Yeah.
I have found that the attrition of acquired client batches is higher than what I've organically got. And so it is, race to the bottom isn't the right term, but because some of these hosting clients I've had for, 10 plus years. So,
Right.
but
Yeah, it can be super sticky.
other things happen, they go out of business, or I have lost people because there's someone more local, or hey, these people do email marketing and they want to take over our hosting as well. I mean, it goes both ways, no matter, even if you're doing a good job. So
Hmm.
now I would say a bigger company in this space, the bigger they get, the more there may be a brand. The last one I did was the biggest I've done, and that has generated some new business that have come
Okay,
through
so even
referrals.
after its transition, because of the reputation that they had built,
Yes,
people were still reaching out to them
yes.
for new websites, new
Yep.
hosting. So, okay.
I think the better play here is to arrange a terms with that seller of, hey, if you get a lead that is not, so when I purchased it, we list out the clients one by one, and this is all you're getting paid on. So if you have a website and something new comes from that, that's mine. But if you get a lead personally, and someone reaches out to you from your sphere of influence, that has value, and I'll pay a commission. Like take 20%. If that's a
Yeah.
$10,000 website project, that's $2,000. I'll pay you. It's business I wouldn't have had, and I want you to know that that has value. So sometimes that is a way to help close a valuation gap, to tell a seller, okay, maybe this isn't quite as much as you want, but if you want to stay in the fold and sell a little, maybe you don't want to manage and design, then we can create revenue there. Or if you think, hey, Link, I haven't raised prices in 15 years. These guys are all paying $10 a month for hosting.
Hmm.
Maybe it should be 25. Because I've seen that, and I'm like, look, man, you're charging way too less here, a little, but I can't raise that on the day one because that's not going to look good for me. So you need to think about
Yeah, like
doing that
the new apartment owner
before.
comes in and
Yeah,
raises everybody's rent.
yeah. But you also know that if you're looking at the long term, you're like, all right, in a few years, I can slowly bump these guys up once they're, feeling comfortable with me and established. So it is future revenue for sure. And, will they leave you over an extra $10 a month? Yeah, a couple might, but most won't.
Yeah, I don't know if we talked about this recently on the show, but I was telling somebody about this, where the podcast editing service, Podcast Fast Track, they said, hey, this was a couple of years ago, so they're like, Nick, we appreciate your business, you've been a client forever, thank you. But new clients, and we haven't raised your rate, since 2016. New clients come in, they're paying up here, and so we need to get you a little bit closer to that. But what we're going to do, because it was like probably a double or 50%, it was like a big jump, and had they immediately gone to that, it would probably been like, oh, let me go look for some alternatives. They said, here's what we're going to do. Every quarter for the next 15 months, we're going to stair step you up there. So eventually you're going to get to, whatever our new rate is. And it was so incremental. You didn't even notice. It was like a frog in the boiling water.
Yeah, yeah.
We had another, one of these other softwares that I use, like, same story. Like, hey, you've been grandfathered in at this rate for 10 years, but now we're going to push you up here. And it was like double. It was like, it made me so angry. It was like, had you just done it incrementally, probably would have never noticed, probably would have, yelled and screamed, but instead, wasted a whole day trying to find alternatives and just like, fine. It's like, they get the stranglehold on you and you're like, the switching costs are too high. And it's like, it makes you so mad. But there's something to that, stair step. And that may, that may help the upside valuation. Is like, okay, I'm buying this, this current level of recurring revenue, but in today's fair market value, like, okay, if I'm able to increase those rates 50%, 100% over the course of time, all of a sudden it can be worth a little bit more, or I can pay it back sooner.
It definitely. I mean, I think you're in that timeline. You might agree not to do it while you're making payments to them. That seems fair, but longer term, you may stair step it. I mean, I took over accounts that were at $10 a month, and I was charging 25, 30, and I remember people like $30. I mean, that's 300 times. Yeah, but it's still only $20 a month.
Mm-hmm.
And there's one or two people that will just rip your head apart, and then you realize maybe that's not a customer I need to hang on to over $20. But we all have a habit of underselling ourselves, and you start to realize, all right, I'm providing value here, and I'm not competing with the discount dollar hosting, because I'm value adding this by being accessible and knowing them when they call by name and not just a number. So that is worth something, and will everyone pay for that? No, but there's enough people that certainly want that personal touch. So you learn to lean into that a bit.
And so day to day, it's responding to customer inquiries. It is putting out any technical fires that might come up. I imagine it's relatively low maintenance, and then it's trying to either fulfill the design work or the project work that comes through, or kind of oversee find somebody to do that. Like, do you have a sense of the hours per day, hours per week that goes into it at this point?
I think generally, on a good day where there's nothing unique going on, I think it could be a couple hours a day of mostly, like you said, just moving emails, intersecting between the client and the developer on projects.
Yeah.
If there's not an outage or something, I mean, that stuff does happen, or where humans and technology mix, or something updates, somebody's website's broken. Oh, I forgot my email password. I mean, so there's a little bit of that stuff, but it's very it's not brain surgery. It's not rocket science. Not everybody has to be responded to in 5 minutes or less. So you do learn to triage. Oh, my site's down. Okay, well, that's important. I better take a look.
Yeah.
Or can you add these pictures to this page when you get a chance? Sure, we'll get that done in the next day or two. And I've got a great. I use something called Zoho Desk. So it's a web-based ticketing tool. So you try to train your customers to send an email into this. It creates a ticket. I've got my team that can just get assigned to that. And I've started allowing team members years ago to be client-facing so they could reply to the client, hey, we got those pictures added. And just taking myself out of some of that communication on a day-to-day basis has certainly freed up my time, because if you're focused on acquisitions, you do need to have some time to be able to take those calls, and then you certainly need to have time when you're integrating.
Yeah.
You not the time to go on vacation when you just added 30 or 40 clients to your fold. You got to be on call and ready just to make sure, especially if you are migrating servers from where they're at to you. There's plenty of things to go wrong there, and you don't want that first impression to be, oh, my site's down now with this new guy.
Yeah. There's a whole technical side that I probably don't want to get too deep into the weeds on that, but something to be aware of, right? It's not just...
Yeah, I've been there. I've been in those moments where something didn't go right, and you got egg on your face, and you just want to crawl under a rock those days. But those are not the norm, and
Yeah, so it sounds like the work is front loaded, and all the technical stuff is figure outable, and
It
like
is,
the
and you
support
you
and stuff.
learn, you learn. I definitely know better the more I do. Like times at bat than anything, you're learning better to. Okay, this is what happened last time. We're going to do it this way this time, and to mitigate that for sure. And that's sort of what helps with the retention is that relationship that you wouldn't have with HostGator. Not mean to pick on HostGator, but if I'm just
Yeah.
hosting with them, it's strictly I need the service as a utility. But if you have a relationship with your web person, it's a
Hmm.
little more full service versus the HostGators are more what I would think the DIY. Right, you have a little more technical knowledge. You can just buying space to host your website.
Yeah, it's that kind of in between sweet spot between that DIY person and then that other, somebody who maybe has somebody in house,
Yes, it
doing their
is.
web. So it's like,
Yep.
kind of that middle of the market, and they're used to paying 30 to, I imagine, maybe 100, $200 a month. That's just kind of their, website
Yep.
budget to keep it
Exactly.
online.
Exactly. You are their web guy or gal, and they take comfort in knowing that they get those domain name things in the mail. Is this real? Nope. They get spam. Should I
Yeah,
click on? Nope.
that's the only direct mail that I get. It's like,
Yeah.
domain registration
Registry.
scam and stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, your thing is going to expire. You're like, well, yeah, but it's set to auto renew. Like, what is this?
Yeah.
Yeah, all this stuff.
So that
But
is part of the value. You're there to. I didn't think I should click on this. Nope, don't click on that. I mean, you're just there to kind of help them with those questions that come up. And if your email can be part of hosting, an email is a little more certainly high maintenance. It's certainly a critical service. People will
yeah,
lose less sleep over their website being down for an hour or so. But if email's down, it's a bigger deal. But it's also sticky. And if you're good at keeping the lights on, there's value in those services. So
yeah. The one that I had briefly thought about trying to acquire was this virtual assistant service in the Philippines, because I had this virtual assistant site at the time, and I want to say it was the Empire Flippers, like it was like their in-house
mm-mm.
agency that they were trying to spin off,
Hmm.
and I forget what they were. It would have been a relatively low acquisition cost or asking price for it, but they may have only had two clients or three clients. It was like,
Hmm.
okay, if this one guy leaves, that's like half of the business. And
Yeah.
it didn't feel super diversified. And it's like, there's a lot of, labor and management, like lower margins, still had like recurring revenue, but it was, more of that
Mm.
service-based business area. But that was one that I had briefly considered.
You learn. I mean, I've learned a lot by going through these and talking to so many companies, even the ones you don't end up doing anything with. I've seen lots of profit and loss statements. I can't think of another industry that is so diverse as this one in terms of how people set stuff up. The margins are all over the place because if you've got a brick and mortar office and you're paying, W-2 employees, your labor could be 70% of your revenue.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying one's better or worse than the other, but there's just a lot of places for, I think, creativity and also thinking about it from a different angle. Lawn care probably is much more similar. Lawn care is lawn care, right?
Yeah.
Looking at different lawn care companies, but in this space, you've got remote, hybrid, in office. You've got a whole wide range of services and pricing, and so it's not really the Wild West still, but it's still quite a range. And so I think that's where you can find some opportunity.
I like it. This is cool. What's next for you? Where do you want to take this thing? What are you excited about these days?
So, it's a great question. It's a hard one to answer because I do find myself sort of at that, as many of us do, I guess, the crossroads of having been doing this 25 years and getting to that age. Or an age where you think, is this what I'm going to be doing forever? And it could be okay with that, but
Somebody's going to send you a letter after this.
yeah,
It's
they
going to
might,
go.
they might. But other things I want to do, and I think what I'd like to do is diversify what I do, continue to do this, but maybe pursue acquisitions a little bit bigger. I'd like to acquire some companies in some different industries as well, some brick and mortar. I mean, for me, there's a valuable and something tangible that you can do with your hands. I fixed this, I built that, I like that aspect. And also, I think, like you said at the beginning of the show, my interest in real estate, diversifying one's income stream. I'd rather have 10 side hustles all making 10 grand a month than to have one making it all. I guess I sleep better at night
Yeah.
with diversification. I find it interesting. It keeps me engaged. So I do think looking at some other opportunities, or there some consulting work, other ways to stay sort of in the lane, but layer it up and use the marketing in other places. So that's a long-winded answer saying I'm not quite sure,
Yeah.
but us entrepreneurs get a little stir crazy if we can't mix it up a little, right?
Yeah, I mean, having $10,000 month income streams sounds pretty awesome. It frees
I
you
mean,
up.
I don't know that. I just threw that number out. It could be
Yeah,
$1,000, right? But
sure, sure.
I guess diversification, and maybe that'd be a crazy problem. You'd go nuts managing it all. But um, I'm a big believer in finding good people to work with that, you are not having to tell them what to do, and they can manage and lead and do things on their own. So that independence. So I
Yeah,
truly believe that you can find a way. You can create anything you want. You just got to make the path.
yeah. Again, super interesting, super creative way to go about it and to build this multi six figure income for just ongoing on an ongoing level, just a couple hours a day. That's you know I think can get a lot of people excited. Like I said, maybe somebody will send you a letter, but imagine some letters are going to start flying after this episode. Windhill.com, that's where you can find Link's design agency. Linkmoser.com is the home base. We'll also link up his LinkedIn as well. Let's wrap this thing up with your number one tip for Side Hustle Nation 2025 edition.
Number one tip, hands down, just get out there and do it. All this stuff is a contact sport. I'm sure it's been said many times before, but you're not going to get a side hustle, a business, a job, a boyfriend, a girlfriend by sitting on the sidelines. You just got to get out there, accept some risk, know that it's going to be uncomfortable and scary, and you're going to make some mistakes, but you'll learn and you'll pivot. So we're still January, it's still the beginning of the year. So I say, make your goals, share them with someone else, make it known, and then just start hitting it.
Make it real. Give some accountability out there, but get out there
Yep.
and do it. Right? You can't play the game from the sidelines. This is similar to the 2022 tip, which was don't look at failure as a bad word. As long as you're failing forward, you're learning something from those mistakes. It's all adds up to that cumulative experience and hopefully some forward progress there. A couple takeaways for me before we wrap. Number one, this is kind of a game of right place, right time. So it's this volume game of sending out a lot of outreach, and the more you can personalize it, the better. But trying to do that at scale, and hopefully get a few bites, like Link said, 10-12% response rate. Really, really strong for that personalized outreach because it cuts through the clutter. Then it comes kind of this diligence phase, looking at the revenue pie and really valuing that recurring revenue a little bit higher. And then this trying to build those relationships quickly and concisely and build up rapport, both with the existing owner because they have some incentive to do that handoff right, and then with the existing client base for continuity for that recurring revenue. Now, if you liked this episode, I think you'll get a kick out of Ryan Golgoski in episode 550. We talked about his web design agency. Wasn't growing through acquisition per se, but had set it up for recurring revenue. I think maybe $200 a month was his average price for web design and ongoing maintenance for targeting almost exclusively pressure washing companies. It was like, man, it was a super inspiring episode. I think he was doing crazy, like $100,000 a month recurring revenue, building websites for pressure washing companies. And then a brick and mortar example of this, inserting yourself into a cash flow that's already happening, was Hannah Ingram in episode 571, where she went out and found this kind of semi-dilapidated brick and mortar car wash in town. No money down deal, owner, financing, bought herself this cash flow, and she was doing really well. It was kind of an interesting, inspiring angle to go look at. She was maybe doing a half hour a day worth of work there in exchange for that income stream. But Big thanks to Link for sharing his insight once again. You can also check out Link's previous episode on the Side Hustle Show. We can link that up. Big thanks to our sponsors for helping make this content free for everyone. As always, you can hit up sidehustlenation.com/deals for all the latest offers from our sponsors in one place. Thank you for supporting the advertisers that support the show. That's it for me. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're finding value in the show, the greatest compliment is to share it with a friend. So fire off that text message to that friend of yours who's always looking for those little life hacks, those creative ways to build extra income. I think they'll like this episode. Until next time, let's go out there and make something happen. And I'll catch you in the next edition of The Side Hustle Show. Hustle on.